So this is the last topic in section 1, and if you think back on what we have done so far, we've looked at what it means that we are studying the New Testament. We've looked at some history before the time of Christ. We've looked at the Roman background and the Jewish background of Christianity. We've looked at Paul's life in detail with his missionary journeys, looking at some of the regions and cities of the empire. And now we're going to look at the main world philosophies at this time. And the reason why this is the last topic in section 1 is that Paul is going to go on his journeys. He's going to meet many different types of people, Jew and Gentile, and many of them have different philosophies. When he writes his letters, he's going to write to different converts and Christian communities that have perhaps a slightly different philosophy than his own. So we want to look at what the main philosophies were at this time. And that's going to help us understand some of the things that he writes in his letters later. So let's start with the question, what is a philosophy? Well, a philosophy basically answers some of the big questions in life. It's a specific worldview or attitude about life and the purpose of life. So philosophical questions are questions like, who am I? Why am I here? What is my purpose in life? Why do I exist? Where am I going? What happens after I die? Those are the types of things that, questions that philosophers ask. And our philosophy is basically John 1 verse 1. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. And so that answers many of our questions. We belong to Jesus Christ. He is the Word, and He is eternal. And we'll come back to that later on. The main passage that looks at these main philosophies that we're going to talk about is Acts 17. And this is during Paul's second journey. He's with Silas, and he's by himself, and basically he is going to Mars Hill to battle some of the main philosophers. And Athens was a city known for learning and academics and university, and many philosophers studied there. It wasn't as prominent of a city at this time as it was during the times of the great philosophers like Socrates and Aristotle and Plato, but it still is an important city in that regard. So Paul goes there and speaks with the philosophers. And basically, he is very concerned with their gods and their lack of believing in the one true God. And they listen to him. They hear him out. But then when he starts to talk about the resurrection, that was a big no-no. When he talked about the resurrection, then they started to laugh at him. One of the philosophies that comes out of that time period, and is something that Paul encountered a lot, is Stoicism. The Stoic believes whatever happens, happens. If you think of our word stoic, which we don't use very often, if somebody has a stoic look on their face, they have a rather serious look. And the Stoic is more of a serious philosophy, especially in contrast with the other philosophy that we're going to look at, which is Epicureanism. But basically, the Stoic has a very bleak view of the matter. Whatever happens, happens. My choices don't matter. There's no purpose. Whatever happens, happens. Very much the philosophy of Stoicism. Within Stoicism, there are 3 sub-philosophies, if you want to call them that. One of them is pantheism. And pantheism is the belief that God and the world are the same thing. Everything is divine. Now that might seem like a positive view of the world. But the problem is that pantheists believe that they are equal to trees, animals. So it's not really a very high view of man at all, because everything is God, everything is divine. The second philosophy is determinism. This is the belief that Basically, the only reason why things are happening right now is because they happened in the past. That this is just simply a chain of events. And so determinism is the belief that events in the past determine reality. The only reason you go to your first hour class is because of the events before it. That philosophically, the only answer is because you came to school, you walked to that room, and you sat down. But we know that there's much more meaning to why you are doing what you're doing. That you are seeking the glory of God, that He's molding you as a young person, as a young child of God. It's much more than just you're in your first hour class because you have to be there. That's maybe how you look at it, but maybe you could challenge yourself to look at it from a little bit different perspective. We are not simply determinists. We believe that events are all in God's eternal plan and have a purpose. Even the simple things like sitting in your first hour class. The third philosophy within Stoicism is fatalism. And fatalism is a very bleak approach to reality. And fatalism says that things happen because they were going to happen. They were necessary to happen. We are not fatalists. Now, sometimes you talk this way at school, like you say, well, if I don't study for my history test, then what will be will be. If I get a D on it, then, well, that was going to happen anyway, so I'm not going to study. And then we somehow feel good when we get that D because we say, well, that was going to happen. That's not a very Christian attitude, is it, right? So we don't have a fatalist view towards events. We believe in God's providence, and if we studied hard and we still got a D, then that was in God's providence. However, we believe that we have personal responsibility and that we reap what we sow. And so the fatalist view kind of excuses bad behavior. You can do whatever you want because, well, it was going to happen anyway. But that's an excuse to sin. The second major philosophy is Epicureanism. And Epicureanism is a different philosophy from Stoicism because it's very positive, live it up for the moment, live in the present, do what you want to do. Epicureanism is very much exactly what is going on in our society today. Really nothing has changed. We don't call it Epicureanism, but we have Epicureanism all around us. And the philosophy of Epicureanism is eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Isn't that the attitude of our society? Look at culture, pop culture, sports. Everything is about living for the moment because who knows what tomorrow will bring. You get one chance at life, do the best you can. Now, as Christians, we do believe that you're called to live in the moment, but we don't look at this life that way, as if we're supposed to consume as much as possible so that we can get everything and enjoy life because, someday we're going to die. No, we view things in this life as good. We can enjoy them. We can go on vacation. We can enjoy time with our friends. But we don't look at this life as all there is. We believe that this is just a passageway to our eternal home in heaven. So we have a whole different view of earthly things. It's not that earthly things are bad, but it's not about everything that we can accomplish and do and all the fun we can have while we're here on earth. But the Epicureans were very prominent within Greek culture. It was all about the present. No consequences. No view of consequences. So we're going to look at 5 questions that kind of fall into Epicureanism before we kind of look at our own philosophy. But it's interesting that they answer some of the philosophical questions that people still ask today. And the first one is, how did the world come into existence? Well, evolutionary theory was not around during the first century. That didn't come until the 19th century under Charles Darwin. But the Epicurean, or the Greek answer to this, was that it was an accidental coming together of atoms, very much a Big Bang. The Big Bang theory is not really that new. It goes back to the time of the Greek philosophers. They believe that atoms came together and we have the galaxy, the many galaxies. Now the interesting thing about that is, where did the atoms come from? Where were they before they were atoms? So this philosophy, in answer to this serious question, is that something came from nothing. Now we believe that something came from nothing, but we believe that there was something before there was nothing, and that of course is God, and He created this earth from nothing in that sense. But this answer suggests that you can have nothing, that without any kind of power, you have something. That is simply nonsense, and it's irrational. The second question, what about man's purpose and goal in life? You could probably guess at this one. Pleasure. That's a supreme good. Pursue happiness. It's the only thing that matters. Get as much as you possibly can in this life. That's their answer. What about the soul? As Christians, we believe the soul is our relationship to the Creator. We have a body, we have a soul. Our soul leaves our body at death and goes to heaven. Our body stays here. At the final resurrection, we believe our body and our soul will be reunited. It will be a new body. But unbelievers have a very difficult time defining the soul. And so the Greeks came up with this definition. Fine particles, so tiny particles scattered throughout the body. So they acknowledged that there had to be some kind of soul, that we're not just mechanical beings or robots. We have feelings, we have emotions, and so they did come up with some kind of definition for soul, and this is what it is. But we obviously believe that the soul is much more than that. Fourth, what do they believe about the moral law? And by the moral law, I mean the 10 Commandments, which we hear every Sunday morning. They deny the 10 Commandments. Not that they were given to Moses, but they deny that God cares about us. He doesn't care about how we live in that sense. So it's up to each individual to live the way they want. That was also an Epicurean belief, a Greek thought. Live for yourself, not for anybody else. And so they deny that God even cares about what we do with our behavior. And so to put the definition up here for you, deny that God cares about our life, it's up to each individual. What about life after death? Well, you could guess at this one too. It does not exist. There is no reward or punishment for what we do in this life. They don't believe in an afterlife. When you die, you are annihilated. You cease to exist. You have no more consciousness and awareness. And it's very much a bleak view because it is rather sad. There's nothing to live for after this life. What about your philosophy? There's a lot of different things you could say about what you believe. How do you answer the big questions in life? I'm going to give you 3 points. And I think the most important place to start is, I am a sinner saved by grace. That's where we have to start. Our life, your life, is motivated by thankfulness. So you do follow the 10 Commandments because you know what Christ did for you. But what about events? We of course believe in God's providence. They're leading to heavenly glory with Jesus Christ. All things that happen to you are happening to prepare you for the life to come. Everything, the good and the bad. Paul confessed this to the philosophers. It's amazing what he says to them. And you can see what their philosophies are like in what he says. If you consider verse 24, God that made the world and all things therein, the Lord of heaven and earth. Verse 25, he is not worshipped with men's hands. Look at verse 26. He hath determined the times before appointed. So Paul understands his audience. He knows what they believe. And then, of course, we have verse 31, because he hath appointed a day in the which he will judge the world in righteousness by that man whom he hath ordained, whereof he hath given assurance unto all men, all types of men, all races, and that he hath raised him from the dead. We have a soul and will be reunited with our body. But verse 32 proves that they laughed at him when he spoke of the resurrection. They thought that was crazy talk. They thought he was just making things up, and that's really what affected Paul in Athens. They didn't believe that, and he will go on and do amazing things with other Christians outside of Athens. But that gives us a nice background into some of the philosophies of the ancient world.